Picture a roadside honky-tonk in the middle of nowhere, neon signs buzzing against a starless sky, gravel crunching under the tires of passing trucks, and the thick smell of spilled beer lingering from last night's rowdiness. Inside, a tired jukebox crackles to life, belting out songs that straddle the line between confession and defiance. Suddenly, a voice roars through the speakers, raw, sneering, and spiked with a rebellious twang. It's David Allan Coe, the self-styled outlaw whose entire life reads like a furious ballad about freedom, sin, and the blurry line between legend and reality. You might know him for "You Never Even Called Me by My Name," or "If That Ain't Country," or from his dusty cameo in the pantheon of outlaw country alongside Willie Whalen and Cash. Yet behind that voice, behind the flamboyant rhinestone suits and the wild eyes, lies a man whose past is riddled with prison breaks, alleged murders, controversies over vile lyrics, unstoppable drug binges, random acts of generosity, and a stubborn refusal to be tamed. This is the story of David Allan Coe, a saga that starts in a swirl of juvenile crimes, climbs to the turbulent heights of country music stardom, and eventually fades into the uneasy quiet of old age with controversies still flickering around him like ghosts at a deserted bar. He was born on September 6, 1939, in Akron, Ohio, to a family scraping by in a working-class environment. Coe's earliest memories, by his own flamboyant accounts, were tinged with trouble, truancy, fights, petty theft. He would later recount how from age 9 he was already in reform schools for ignoring every adult who tried to steer him straight. If it's even half true, it suggests a childhood haunted by restlessness, a raw anger at authority, and an innate drive to test the boundaries. That rebellious streak set the stage for everything to come. The rigid discipline of institutions only hardened him. The story goes that he learned early on how to toughen up or risk being devoured by the juvenile system. He claimed he was first locked up for skipping school and theft, though the specifics remain murky. Coe himself never let facts get in the way of a good story, but what's certain is that by his teens, petty mischief had grown into real crimes. The 1950s found Coe in and out of juvenile facilities in Ohio, apparently racking up convictions for burglary, car theft, or worse. He boasted that by the time he turned 17 in 1956, he was a seasoned thief, deeply familiar with the cold floors of juvenile halls. Some say he was drawn to theft simply because he never saw any path to comfort or freedom except by taking it. Others figure he craved a sense of danger. He was a wiry, intense kid with a chip on his shoulder, no illusions about forging a normal life. By 1960, he'd escalated to armed robbery and possession of burglary tools. The law caught up with him. The next place to house him was the Ohio State Penitentiary. He was only 21, but he'd already lived enough drama for 3 lifetimes. Prison turned him into a hardened figure, or maybe it simply revealed who he was all along. He claims he faced violence inside those walls, stabbings, sexual propositions, racial tensions. In a 1977 New York Times piece, references are made to Coe's claim that he killed an inmate who propositioned him. He was never charged, and official records remain fuzzy. Coe, for his part, inflated these tales in songs like "Pussy Whipped Again," weaving a menacing aura that only fanned the flames of his outlaw persona. Whether the murder story was real or tall talk, it stuck. He was the convict who took no nonsense, who might kill you if you tested him. And if you asked him, he'd just grin that crooked grin and say, "You don't want to find out." Beyond the lethal rumors, Coe's rap sheet included multiple attempts to break out. In 1963, he supposedly tried sawing through prison bars with contraband blades, only to be thwarted by an alert guard. 2 years later, in 1965, he orchestrated a more elaborate scheme with smuggled tools, but again, he was caught. These fiascos, outlined in his 1978 autobiography, Just for the Record, became the stuff of outlaw country lore, the scrawny prisoner who just wouldn't stay locked up. By 1967, after nearly 7 years in the system, Coe got parole. In his version of events, he impressed the parole board by performing songs and promising to mend his ways. There's a legend that Johnny Cash heard him sing at an impromptu Folsom prison show and vouched for his potential, though that story is unverified. Coe didn't mind fueling such rumors, anything to feed the legend that he was the next big ex-con folk hero in country music. When Coe finally tasted freedom, he took a bus to Nashville, Tennessee, the mecca of country music. The problem was that 1960s Nashville prized squeaky clean crooners who wore suits and sang about heartbreak in polite terms, or it revered the polished grand dames like Loretta Lynn. Coe was none of that. He was a chain-smoking ex-con with a face etched by scars, arms covered in tattoos from lockup, a loud mouth, and a flair for lewd jokes. He had minimal sense of subtlety. By 1969, he'd scrounged enough to cut his debut album, Penitentiary Blues, a rough blues-inflected record that spelled out his prison experiences in stark terms. Critics in the mainstream country press found it too raw, too menacing. But a small cult of fans said, yes, this is real country. This is the heartbreak and grit that the sanitized Opry crowd wants to hide. Coe jumped wholeheartedly into that outlaw vibe, forging connections with rebellious artists like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, though he never quite joined their top tier. In the mid-1970s, Coe found a foothold. He penned songs that hammered a rowdy honesty about being a broke, long-haired misfit in a conservative industry. One of his earliest attention grabbers was Long-Haired Redneck, a track that basically called out the rhinestone mainstream for not welcoming guys like him. Around the same time, he scored commercial success as a songwriter. Coe wrote Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone for Tanya Tucker, which soared to number 1 in 1974. That success gave him a bit of leverage. Country fans took note. Behind the cussing and the weird clothes might be a songwriter of real sensitivity. He soon put out more hits, If That Ain't Country being a prime example, championing his poor rural background. Then there was You Never Even Called Me By My Name, co-written with Steve Goodman, which ironically lampooned country cliches while becoming a honky-tonk anthem. People either embraced Coe's provocative style or dismissed him as a crude blowhard. He wore that divisiveness like a badge of honor. But any goodwill he built soon cracked under the weight of a new scandal, the X-rated albums. In 1977, Coe recorded Nothing Sacred, an underground record not distributed through normal channels. It was vile, loaded with explicit sexual language, jokes about bestiality, profane odes to misogyny, stuff that made mainstream country recoil. He followed it with Underground album in 1982, featuring tracks like Nigger Fucker that used a racial slur so offensive that even fans accustomed to raunchy humor felt uneasy. Coe insisted these songs were comedic sketches meant for truckers, not for mainstream consumption. He argued they were akin to the old tradition of party records that comedians like Red Fox had done for adult audiences. But the racist language and shock factor overshadowed any comedic veneer. When bootleg copies surfaced, critics and the media hammered him as a bigot. Many radio stations and venues blacklisted him. The CMA refused to associate with him. He tried damage control, saying he had black friends and integrated band members that he was no racist. But the scandal was colossal. The vile references to bestiality, the repeated N-word in song titles, the misogynistic lines, these were stains that no apology could wash away. Some hardcore fans found twisted humor in it, praising him for flouting political correctness. But the broader country community saw him as a pariah. The controversy persists to this day, overshadowing many of his more respectable achievements. Amid that uproar, Coe's personal life was an ongoing train wreck fueled by heavy drug and alcohol use. Since the early 1970s, he'd been indulging in cocaine, marijuana, amphetamines, and gallons of whiskey. It fit the outlaw persona, but it also wrecked his stability. In 1974, the Tennessean reported that Coe was arrested for public intoxication after a bar brawl, paying a $500 fine. The real cost was reputational, as more and more critics pegged him as a self-destructive troublemaker. By 1980, on tour supporting the album Human Emotions, he missed multiple shows due to benders, forcing promoters to scramble for replacements. Then in 1983, he got into a DUI crash in Tennessee, fled the scene, and ended up serving a 30-day jail sentence. The press had a field day, calling him a real long-haired redneck who'd lost any moral high ground. The 1980s were the era of the urban cowboy fad in country, and Coe was the antithesis, an unkempt figure who maybe wouldn't shower for days, ranting about the system, snorting coke backstage. Some fans lapped up the drama, but mainstream audiences turned away, especially after the fiasco with the racist songs. Meanwhile, Coe tried to spin it as a crusade for authenticity. He claimed that guys like Waylon and Willie respected him, but the Nashville gatekeepers insisted he was too wild. The feuds with the Nashville establishment only hardened in the 1970s and early 1980s. Coe openly mocked mainstream acts as rhinestone suit-wearing phonies. In songs like Long-Haired Redneck, he basically told the Opry crowd to get lost. Label executives demanded that he tone down his explicit lyrics, which fueled more outbursts. He'd threatened to walk away from major deals. In 1978, he gave a scorching interview to Texas Monthly, attacking big stars like Kenny Rogers for peddling bland hits. The Grand Ole Opry blacklisted him, and he claimed to wear that exile like a medal. Yet the ban and the industry ostracism also meant fewer radio plays, fewer big sponsorships, fewer ways to reach a mainstream audience. This near exile contributed to a downward spiral that left him reliant on smaller venues and the loyalty of those fans who craved unfiltered rebellion. If the outlaw brand was the hill he chose to die on, he was going to wave that black flag right to the end, no matter how it narrowed his commercial prospects. Then in 1990, the outlaw facade took a new hit. The IRS seized Coe's Nashville property for $1 million in unpaid taxes. That's about $2.3 million in today's money. It seemed Coe had spent every dime on drugs, partying, ill-managed tours, and who knows what else, neglecting the massive tax bills piling up. The Nashville scene covered the spectacle of federal agents hauling away his belongings, including his tour bus. Coe told anyone who would listen that he was being persecuted for being an outlaw, for refusing to play the game. But the truth might have been simpler. He was just irresponsible. The scandal got weirder when he apparently took refuge in a portion of Cumberland Caverns, living like a hermit for weeks, fueling tales that David Allan Coe went feral. Rolling Stone called it an outlaw meltdown. For fans, it was a sad symbol of how far he'd fallen. The man who once wrote defiant anthems was now literally holed up underground, dodging creditors. The fiasco was a hallmark of an artist who never quite balanced the ledger between freedom and responsibility. As the 1990s wore on, mainstream country continued drifting toward polished pop stylings. Coe was left in a kind of subcultural limbo. He put out music on indie labels, played rowdy biker rallies, sometimes jammed with younger rock or metal acts intrigued by his raw style. He tried to maintain a me-against-the-world stance, but it carried less shock value as time passed. Meanwhile, a new generation of outlaw country fans discovered him through those old 1970s and early 80s cuts, unaware of the controversies. They might have known "You Never Even Called Me by My Name" or "If That Ain't Country," but not the obscene side. If they stumbled on the X-rated albums, they'd be confronted with vile slurs and wonder who exactly this man was. Some concluded he was a relic of a less enlightened era, while others chalked it up to shock humor. Coe didn't clarify much. He occasionally insisted he wasn't racist, citing that his band was integrated, that he jammed with African-American musicians like Kid Rock, or that he revered Ray Charles. Still, the stigma didn't vanish. If anything, the persona aged into a bizarre mix of road-worn paternal figure and the same old troublemaker. He survived a near-fatal motorcycle accident in 2011 that required major back surgery. By then, Coe was in his early 70s, less able to prowl the stage with swagger, though he still tried. He kept a small but fierce fan base that turned out at clubs and rallies to watch the old outlaw growl about living on the edges. In 2019, he performed at Sturgis, the biker mecca, reminding the faithful that David Allan Coe was not quite done. Contrary to sporadic rumors or hoaxes, as of April 9, 2025, David Allan Coe remains alive. He's 85, living quietly in Florida with his wife Kimberly. Health issues like heart troubles and the aftermath of his surgeries hamper him, so he rarely tours. He does sporadically post on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, about politics, either praising right-wing figures or lambasting the music industry's hypocrisy. Typical Coe unpredictability. He hints from time to time that he's writing new songs or planning a comeback album, though it's unclear if those ever materialize. In official statements from the last few years, he's said he's done with the most grueling aspects of the road. But the website selling his merch remains active, capitalizing on the enduring cult status. The man who once flirted with the mainstream has ended up a sort of outlaw elder, revered by a select group and shunned by most. He might take pride in that. Looking back, it's tricky to separate myth from fact. The claims of murder in prison, the repeated escape attempts, some are documented, others might be tall tales. The controversies over racism remain indisputable. The X-rated albums exist, featuring slurs that offended countless listeners. The drug-fueled brawls, the tax fiascos, the jaw-dropping stunts all swirl together. Yet so does the music. For every repugnant track like Nigger Fucker, there's a heartfelt ballad that resonates with working-class pain. For every grotesque rumor, there's a straightforward country gem that captures small-town heartbreak. That tension mirrors the man's entire existence. He sold himself as the ultimate outlaw, so it's no wonder he ended up living out every extreme. Critics debate whether Coe's artistry can or should be separated from his scandalous behavior. Some maintain that his best songs do reflect a real empathy for the downtrodden, just as Merle Haggard's ex-con background lent authenticity to his ballads. Others argue that lines like the ones on those X-rated records cross a moral threshold that disqualifies him from reverence. Coe himself offers no apology, doubling down on the notion that he's an entertainer, not a role model. And ironically, that stance cements him as a peripheral figure in the outlaw country pantheon. Fans of outlaw music love rebelliousness, sure, but typically they cringe at unrepentant bigotry. Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Johnny Paycheck, they had their own demons, but they seldom stooped to the taboo-laden extremes Coe touched. So the question remains, Is David Allan Coe a misunderstood rebel poet, or an opportunistic shock jock who exploits vile language for attention? The answer likely depends on which records you spin and which interviews you trust. He was never a star who courted wide acceptance. He thrived on partial acceptance. That partial acceptance is enough to sustain a cult audience. Bikers, rockers, hardcore country fans who admire that he never groveled for mainstream approval. The trade-off is that he's largely absent from mainstream retrospectives. The Grand Ole Opry never welcomed him. The CMA pays no tribute to him. Younger artists rarely cite him as an influence except in hush-hush contexts. He remains the skeleton in country's closet, a name that surfaces in heated debates about how outlaw is too outlaw. And so, as you stand in that imaginary roadside honky-tonk and the jukebox flips to a David Allan Coe track, you feel the tension in the air. Those who know the controversies might bristle. Others might just tap their feet to a raucous tune about love gone wrong. The music resonates with a strange power. The voice, gravelly and raw, emerges from decades of prison cells, drug binges, repeated run-ins with the law, and yes, some deeply problematic attitudes. The same man who penned tender tributes to heartbreak also recorded hateful lines he later brushed off as jokes. The same man who teased mainstream country for lacking soul ended up blackballed from the very audience he tried to shock. And at 85, he's still breathing, still refusing to say sorry, still clinging to the outlaw brand. Maybe in some twisted sense that's the brand's final triumph, the man who never caved. So let the final image be of an old man in Florida, a legend in his own mind, a pariah to many, and a hero to a stubborn few, still drawing breath at 85, still cackling at polite society's shock, still certain that no regrets matter except the ones he never gave voice to in a song. David Allan Coe, alive, unrepentant, a living contradiction. Listen to a snippet of If That Ain't Country and let the rawness remind you that the road from juvenile halls to the bright lights of Nashville is paved with shattered taboos, prison secrets, racial epithets, whiskey bottle confessions, fleeting stardom, and the unstoppable defiance of a man who would rather be hated than forgotten. Maybe that's all there is to say, like a battered guitar chord fading in the neon gloom, leaving echoes of a messy legacy that refuses to be erased.